Hey everyone! Today we're diving into a lesser-known chapter of history, the Northern or Baltic Crusades. These weren't your typical crusades like the ones in the Holy Land. While those were about reclaiming lands from Muslim rule, the Northern Crusades, from the 12th to 15th centuries, were all about converting pagans to Christianity in places like Prussia, Livonia, which is modern-day Estonia, and Lithuania. The Teutonic Knights, a military order, took over these campaigns by the mid-13th century. They didn't just spread Christianity, they also carved out their own militarized state in Prussia. Sure, they converted the local population to Christianity, but let's be real, religion was often just an excuse. At the heart of it, these crusades were more about grabbing land and wealth. By the 15th century, the region was facing new challenges from powers like the Poles, Russians, and Ottoman Turks, so the focus shifted from religious crusades to regular old warfare. Now, what made these Northern Crusades different? Besides converting people, these crusades were another way to expand the influence of Christian rulers, especially around the German borders, where paganism still held strong. Just like the Crusades in the Middle East, these ones had religious perks, like a get-out-of-sin card for those who joined. But let's not forget the real incentives: land, wealth, and even slaves. The first Northern Crusades were led by the Saxons, targeting the Wends, a group of pagan Western Slavs. Unlike crusades aimed at reclaiming Christian territory, these were about converting non-believers. The German Empire had a long history of sending Christian missionaries to the northeast, where constant wars raged against pagan states. Reports of atrocities and the murder of missionaries, like the one from the Archbishop of Magdeburg in 1108, fired people up. When the Second Crusade was called in 1145 by Pope Eugenius III to recapture Edessa in the Middle East, many German nobles decided to deal with the pagans closer to home instead. In March 1147, at a meeting in Frankfurt, it was decided that the Baltic region would be the top priority. This plan got a big thumbs up from Bernard of Clairvaux, a super influential abbot. By April, Pope Eugenius III gave this crusade his blessing, offering remission of sins to those who took part. But the Pope didn't stop there. He made it very clear there was to be no mercy for these pagan tribes. His exact words were, "We utterly forbid that for any reason whatsoever a truce should be made with these tribes, until such time as, by God's help, they shall be either converted or wiped out." Harsh, right? This wasn't just about fighting. It was about conversion or destruction. The goal was to make sure the pagans either became Christians or were completely eliminated. The Pope wanted this crusade to be the final one in the Baltic, especially because previous attempts at converting the region hadn't stuck. Many pagans would convert, only to go back to their old ways later, or blend pagan and Christian practices. And now let's talk about the Wends Crusade, a key part of the Northern Crusades. Now, before the Crusader army even had a chance to set off, the Wends saw the writing on the wall and decided to strike first. They launched a preemptive attack on the Christian-controlled port of Lübeck. This all went down between June and September of 1147, when a Saxon-Danish army responded by attacking two pagan settlements, Doben and Malhau, both in modern-day northeast Germany. Now, Doben got off relatively easy. Its population agreed to be baptized, and that ended the conflict there. Malhau, though? Not so lucky. The Crusaders burned down the pagan temple and destroyed the surrounding lands. After a failed siege at Domin, the Crusaders set their sights on Stettin, which was in Pomerania. But the people there managed to avoid an attack by displaying crucifixes on the city walls, convincing the Crusaders that they were already Christian. Overall, the campaign didn't live up to its lofty goals. Sure, there were some conversions, but it was mostly like the usual raiding parties that were sent into the region every year. To make matters worse, the Danes and Saxons didn't exactly trust each other, which only complicated things. When it was all said and done, they managed to convert just one chieftain, grabbed a little loot, and that was about it. The Wends leader, Prince Niklot, stayed in power, and his people carried on practicing paganism. Definitely not what Pope Eugenius had envisioned for this crusade. Then came the Teutonic Knights. They were a military order that would dominate the Baltic Crusades from the 13th century onward. Between 1193 and 1230, Saxon Crusader armies were sent to defend Christian missions in Livonia. But just like before, this wasn't so much about religion as it was about land. Despite some military wins, long-term conversion didn't really happen. The Teutonic Knights took things further. They absorbed other military orders like the Sword Brothers in 1237 and fought non-stop in Prussia, attacking neighboring Lithuanians and Livonians. These guys were a well-oiled war machine, professional knights with heavy cavalry, backed by skilled crossbowmen. They were masters of siege warfare, far more advanced than the pagan groups they faced. On top of that, they were excellent diplomats, forming alliances with other powers to fight against their common enemies. Even though they faced frequent guerrilla attacks and revolts, like the big one in 1260, the Teutonic Knights had plenty of support from other crusaders across Europe. Big names like Rudolf of Habsburg and King Ottokar II of Bohemia even joined their cause. And of course, the Pope's blessing made it all possible. The Crusader ideal had now morphed into one focused on conversion and grabbing land from those who didn't accept Christianity. The Teutonic Knights were hugely successful in Prussia, essentially turning it into their own state. They expanded German culture in the region, built churches and monasteries, and constructed castles to protect their new territories. By the 14th century, much of the Baltic region had been forcibly converted to Christianity, with Lithuania finally coming into the fold when its Grand Prince, Jogailo, promised to convert his people in 1386. But by the end of the 14th century, it was clear that the Teutonic Knights were more interested in politics and land than in religious conversion. They were even accused of attacking Christians and making deals with heathens. Many pagans resisted conversion not because they were against Christianity, but because they didn't want to live under the brutal rule of the Teutonic Order. As time went on, the Teutonic Knights' power started to decline. In the 15th century, they faced a coalition of forces, including the Lithuanians, Poles, Russians, and Mongols. In the First Battle of Tannenberg in 1410, the Teutonic Knights suffered a crushing defeat. By 457, they had to move their headquarters to Königsberg as their power faded. While they continued to fight in Livonia into the 16th century, mainly against Orthodox Russians and Ottoman Turks, their days were numbered. Finally, in 1525, the Teutonic Order was fully secularized in Prussia, and in 1562, the Livonian branch followed. That was the end of crusading in the Baltic.